What's going on, Bears fans? It's the season's over. You turn the page to the next season, so Draft on Tap is here with you. Free agency frenzy started today. Nothing's official, but the quote unquote legal tampering period started today. So we've had a bunch of moves all around the NFL. But first and foremost, my man Danny Shimon, how are you doing, man? How was your weekend?
Weekend was kind of hectic. I mean, obviously, the free agency frenzy, that's a perfect name for it because today all day, obviously at 11 Central, noon Eastern, the legal tampering window opened up, which I find to be hilarious that the way they've named it the legal tampering window. This has all been negotiated. These all been talked about over at the combine. That's why a lot of the GMs and owners, and basically teams go down to the combine for a lot of it, not to do all these negotiations and all that stuff. So, it's been a frenzy. Obviously, things broke prior to the weekend and over the weekend. And then actually last time we spoke, with our audience, there's a big retirement. Another hole opened up in terms of on the roster, and now the Bears went ahead and have since kind of temporarily put a patchwork on there. And we'll get into that here as we get into the show. But yeah, I figured, hey man, we weren't scheduled to have a show tonight. We figured we're going to hit the offensive line or off-ball linebackers next Monday.
Right.
But we're like, with all this news, all this player movement, let's just jump on and do a emergency pod and free agency style and talk about some of the moves and hopefully some of the ballroom listeners there are going to chime in with their opinions if they're disappointed, discouraged. I know a lot of Bears fans went into this offseason hoping that the Bears would go ahead and make a big splash, whether it's on the defensive line or even at left tackle. But so far they've been pretty conservative. They made a couple of moves, one in particular that I absolutely love, and we'll get into that here as well. But it's been since the last time we spoke, it's been a wild NFL week, and not just for the Bears but for the entire league. So let's go ahead, let's get into it. And we'll touch a little bit of free agency, some draft, and all that stuff. So all the great.
Well, I mean, before today, we had a couple of big moves, like you just alluded to. Drew Dalman calls it a career, which is, I mean, to each their own. But I was shocked, because last year we give him the extension. He had only played 4 years, so I was like, wow, now we've locked down the center position for the next 5-6 years. He calls it a career. He's able to walk off into the sunset and enjoy his life. And another guy left town, and that was DJ Moore. We trade him and a 5th-round pick to the Buffalo Bills and get a 2nd-round pick in return. What were your thoughts on this trade, Danny? He was kind of the odd man out in the offense, huh?
Yeah, with DJ, obviously the writing was a little bit on the wall. Both Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson talked up DJ in terms of at the combine and their interviews there, their sessions with the media in terms of how they loved them and all that stuff. And I do believe that. I do believe that he was an integral part of that team in terms of, he was liked. He was also very tough. He's a guy that really, exemplified some of the grit that the Bears want to show, playing through injuries, so on and so forth. But, from the day he was acquired, DJ was always labeled as a number 1 receiver. I was one of the first to vehemently say, he's a good receiver, but he's not a number 1 receiver. He was a number 1 receiver at the time on the Bears. But since then, that's changed, right? Because as we saw with this past season, that's moving towards a whole different generation in terms of pass catchers for the Bears, right? And some might say, oh, Rome Odunze, the number 9 overall pick, or Luther Burden. The number 1 receiver going into this season, guys, is Colston Loveland. Yeah. And it's evident he was as that season ended last year, he just picked up steam, and it continued in the playoffs. And you saw when Caleb needed a first down, or it was a vital, time in the ball game, more so than not, he looked for Colston Loveland, and he put up some monster numbers, going toward those 2 playoff games. Unfortunately, got twisted his ankle towards the tail end of that Rams game. That's why he wasn't there on that last play. But getting back to DJ Moore, he was becoming more and more phased out in the offense. As you saw it week in and week out, there are some games where he had no targets, one or a game with 1 or 2 targets. And then there's games where he had a touchdown and almost, 70, 80 yards and so on and so forth. So, and there's times where Ben Johnson tried to get creative with him just to kind of get him involved in the offense, get him some touches. He lined him up in the backfield and give him the ball as a running back. So there was ways Ben Johnson was trying to get the ball to him. So it came to a point where it's kind of like a perfect storm where the Bears needed cap space. The
Yep.
Bills needed a receiver to go with Josh Allen, and then they offered up the Bills, surprisingly, offered up a second-round pick, and I think that was just too good for the Bears to go ahead and pass up. So I think that kind of all worked together where, hey, we love DJ, but if you think about it, he was going to be your third, maybe fourth option in his offense.
Exactly.
Pick for someone like that and to clear that cap space and that contract off your books allows you now to go ahead and make some more moves here in free agency. I think that was a good trade for the Bears, and I think it's going to be a good trade for Buffalo as well. I know a lot of their fans are kind of saying, "Oh, the second round pick, and you took all his contract." But we saw today some of these numbers these receivers are getting. Right, receivers less established than DJ Moore are getting paid number one type of receiver money. So I think Buffalo, if you got to be happy with that. It costs you a second round pick, but I think you have a receiver that's going to gel well with Josh Allen. And obviously he's got the chemistry and the history with the head coach and now the play caller Joe Brady back in the days with Carolina, where he had 2 productive years there with the Panthers. DJ did under Joe Brady's play calling. So I think it all just worked really well. I think it's going to be a win-win for both teams, and I wish DJ nothing but the best. He was a heck of a player, and obviously that whole last play thing, that a lot of that kind of I guess left a sour taste in a lot of Bears fans' mouth. But just go back and see how DJ played in previous years, and yeah, there was some questionable stuff. The game in Houston where he kind of walked off the field and all that stuff in mid route and whatever. But for the most part, DJ showed up week in and week out, played through injury, was productive.
Absolutely.
And I think you tip our hat to him. Say, all right, man. The Bears play the Bills next year. I believe it's in Buffalo, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think so. In their new stadium up there.
We'll see how DJ feels, on that game. But I think it's a win-win trade, and I think that was a trade that I think it was wise for Poles to recoup that second round pick, and then also for Brandon Beane to bring in an accomplished receiver like DJ Moore, although not a true number one receiver. Still better than what they have currently right now for Josh Allen. I think if you're in fantasy football, go ahead and draft DJ Moore next year because he's going to get a hell of a lot more targets next year with Josh Allen than he got this year with Caleb and Ben Johnson.
Very true. Yeah, I love what you said. I really think this was a win-win for both teams. I'm stoked to get a second-round pick out of them. Like you said, though, DJ Moore had become third or fourth option. We drafted Rome Odunze high in the same draft as Caleb. Luther Burden really came on late last year. I love the way that guy plays. His yak ability is insane. And like you said, Colston Loveland's a beast. And even Cole Kmet, when the game was on the line against the Rams, look where Caleb went, and he even said, I've got a 6'6" tight end out there. I'm just going to give him a shot, and he pulled it in to tie up the ball game. But yeah, DJ Moore, he'll always be remembered for putting away the Packers twice this year, and all the, like you said, showing up week in and week out. And Ryan Poles said that as well. The grit that he showed to show up week in and week out and play through injuries and really show up every single day and give it his all. He'll always be remembered to me. I mean, he finished, I think I heard him talking on ESPN 1000. He finished in like the top 10 of Bears career receiving yards, which is crazy.
Bears history of receivers is not great.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. But I thought it was a win-win for both. We do got some people in the chat already talking about our signings.
Plus the one thing real quick with I've said on our first show that Ben Johnson wants to add speed to that room. He wants to add dynamic speed, not just a quick guy. He wants to add someone that can stretch the field vertically, whether it's on the outside the numbers, or in the slot. So I think whether it's the draft, probably going to be more so the draft than veteran free agency, because there's no one really out there that gives you that type of production other than Rashid Shaheed, but he got big money to stay with Seattle. So for me, it's that's where he's going to add more playmaking to that room. And Ben, I trust, and that's what he wants to add, and that's something you have to subtract. Get the second round pick. Now you can add an element of speed, a vertical threat to that room, and kind of move forward here with that offense. So.
Yeah, I'll definitely be excited to see what they add in the draft. We're draft guys, obviously, draft on tap. M. Lanera 23 says, we got a great deal. Moore seemed to be on a downward trend, but still has more in the tank, but not worth his contract. And that was the big thing. We were over the cap if we could afford to get him under the cap, he'd still be a Chicago Bear, I think.
Yeah,
but that we
that's
had to make
exactly it. Like I
moves.
said, it was a perfect combination or a perfect storm, if you will. Bears needed to get under the cap. Buffalo needed a veteran, good receiver. They're offering up a second round pick, which again, I am shocked they got a second round pick out of it. But hey,
Yeah.
great deal. And like I said, it's a win-win for both teams. I feel like I think Deidre's going to be great next year for Buffalo, and hopefully the Bears utilize that second round pick and fill one of these needs along the offense and defensive lines.
Absolutely. We'll just get right into the signings they made today. The first signing that came down, I was expecting a big splash, Danny, when I was tuned in. But the first signing was defensive tackle Neville Gallimore, former Indianapolis Colt, Los Angeles Ram, and I believe Dallas Cowboy.
Yeah.
What do you know about this guy?
Yeah, third round pick out of Oklahoma. Obviously, Gallimore, when he came out, he was 6'2", 304. He was more of that three technique coming out of Oklahoma. Ends up going to Dallas, who utilizes that quick, three technique type of defensive front. And like I said, 6'2", 304, 32 and 3/4 arm length, 30-inch vertical. So he's got some athletic ability. 1.72 10-yard split. I remember talking about guys from when I was talking about defensive tackles. You want that 10-yard split, guys that those closing bursts, closing speed. So it gives you some of that. But really, going back to his career here in the NFL, it's really been more of like a backup, right? He's been in 83 games. He only has 26 starts, so he's not really considered a starter. And that's why when they signed him, I figured it was more of like a rotational guy. I think this guy is going to replace Andrew Billings, who obviously we know is a free agent and probably won't be re-signed, will not be re-signed, I should say. And so Gallimore is going to take that spot. He came out at Oklahoma at 304, and then I saw Greg Gabriel tweet out he was playing at 315, 320 last year for the Colts. So he might be more of that one technique. And again, he's going to be taking that rotation spot of Andrew Billings, I feel like. So he's a rotational guy, not someone that there wasn't big money given to him either way. So not something I really kind of like either way hated or loved it. He's a backup, he's a rotation piece, and he's going to be playing. Rotating in and out, on certain downs. So he's a depth piece, if you want to call him that. So, yeah. By no means does signing Neville Gallimore mean that the Bears are done looking at defensive tackle.
Right.
Again, just a guy for backup and a guy that they can kick out there for a couple of series here and there and give him some productive plays, whether it's in the run game or even hopefully generate some sort of pass rush. But yeah, last year was his best year with the Colts. His most sacks last year was 3.5 sacks. So that's the most he's had so far in his NFL career. So, yeah, that's my feeling on Gallimore is like I said, more of a depth piece and guy that's going to just play a couple of series here and there.
Aldo said, "Can you start over? I'm late." We can't. You haven't missed much, Aldo. We went over the DJ Moore trade and the first signing, which was Gallimore, the defensive tackle.
He missed a lot. He missed some of my best analyst work right now. He just missed it. But
hey, I got to tell you, I didn't know this Neville Gallimore until you broke him down there. But yeah, the size, he kind of marks the ending most likely of Andrew Billings. But this also gives him a little flexibility in the draft where a lot of people were kind of pigeonholing Caden McDonald out of Ohio State. Maybe they could still go that route, but this kind of allows them to do what they talked about at the combine, going best player available possibly.
See, but the guy like McDonald, Caden McDonald, or even Lee Hunter, two guys that I like at that pick, if they stay at pick 25 and if they still have a needed defensive tackle heading into the draft, those are guys that could potentially be starters. Gallimore to me is not a starter. He's more like, again, a backup guy that can fill in, a series here and there. So, depending on what happens here moving on in free agency, and obviously the Bears clear a lot of cap space, haven't really made a big splash. I was told it would be more quantity than more quantity than quality in terms of they're going to fill a lot of the holes on the roster with some of the signings we saw today as well. So I think that's the approach they're going to do. If something happens or something approaches Poles and Ben Johnson, where it's like, all right, we got this player A that's going to fill a huge need. We got to go out there and make a big splash. I think they'll do it, but I just think right now they're more of they're kind of tapping their toes into the water and just seeing, what's out there right now and just filling in, holes here and there. So,
well, the next signing I think was kind of a big splash. They signed safety Kobe Bryant, former Seattle Seahawk, just won the Super Bowl with them. I remember this guy at Cincinnati playing corner alongside Sauce Gardner. They moved him to safety in Seattle. So I love this signing. They gave him a lot of money too, but they did it smartly. Like his cap hit's not very high at all this year, even though he got paid a large contract. I think it was 3 years, 40 million, if I'm not allegedly.
A bunch of that's backloaded as well. I think next year his cap hit is like either under 6 or under 5 million or something like that. So it's a really nice way of kind of setting it up where a lot of his money is going to be backloaded. And you're right, I'm with you there, AC. This was the most exciting signing of the the day for me with the Bears is, Kobe Bryant. You talked about it. He was a corner at Cincinnati. Actually, went to Cincinnati as a safety, and then he flipped him over to corner, and he came out. It was a 6'1", 193. Ran a 4.48 40, a 1.56 10-yard split. And one thing that Johnson, even to some extent Dennis Allen and Ryan Poles have been kind of hammering is they want to get younger and faster on defense. And I think this is a guy, even going back to his days at Cincinnati, he was a ball hawk. He's this guy who was always around the football, always had his hands on that ball, and is making plays. In Cincinnati, he had 10 career in Cincinnati, he had 10 career interceptions. Comes here now to Seattle. They flip him to safety, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, was a key member of that Seattle Seahawks defense last year that won the Super Bowl. And again, just a ball hawk. I tweeted out some of his numbers earlier. Last 2 years, he's had 7 interceptions, 17 passes defensed, 7 forced fumbles, 9 tackles for loss. He's at or around the line of scrimmage. He's comfortable there. He's comfortable dropping back as well. And, what do we talk about some of their safeties? They want ball production. They want guys that are on the football, guys that can punch the ball out when you make a tackle, guys that can intercept the ball when the ball is an opportunity there to go and intercept it. So I think this kid is a hell of a signing, one of those underrated signings I think is going to go down as one of the better free agent signings of this free agent period so far. The fact that they got him away from the Seattle Seahawks defending Super Bowl champions, I think that's a huge kudos to Poles and company. And obviously Johnson and company as well there. So yeah, this is, to me, is exciting. Finally marks the end of the Jaquan Brisker era here in Chicago. I think that was something that was a bad second round pick. And I think will go down as a bad second round pick. But I think my next thing is bring back Kevin Byard. You pair Byard next to Kobe Bryant. Now we got a nice combination there. And I know Byard is up there in age, but he's still productive, and he's a leader. He's a leader back there, and I think that's one of the main things I want him back is for that leadership voice in that defensive secondary, in the locker room as well. And I know also doesn't mean you have to abandon the position in the draft. I mean, whether you're going to bring back Elijah Hicks as a backup and special teamer, and then draft another young guy, late day 2, early day 3 in the draft, that's also an option there. But for me, you got Bryant. Great signing. Now lock up Byard if you can. Those are your 2 starters, and then just now fill in on the back end in terms of the depth behind those 2 guys. So this was to me the best signing of the day so far.
Well, that was going to be my question. Is I thought maybe the Kobe Bryant signing was a sign that they weren't going to sign Byard, because I feel like they kind of play the same position. But you think they could play next to each other back there?
Yeah, I think Bryant is comfortable at line of scrimmage, so filling in that Brisker role as well. And I also think that he can also be someone that can drop back and if you play a too high safety look as well, which they did a lot at Seattle, playing that too high safety look. So I think he's going to pair nicely with Kevin Byard. So to me, this was a replacement for Jaquan Brisker, and Byard is still very much in the picture. The fact they don't have him signed yet, Byard is a little concerning. It's giving me a little pause here, and I hope it doesn't end that way. Because, like I said, I really want him back. I just, but the fact that he's not signed yet is a little concerning. Either they're not giving him the money that he's looking for, and they're allowing him, Byard that is, they're allowing him to go out there and kind of test the market and see what he can come back with, and see what the market kind of gives him, and then they'll kind of match it or let him go. So hopefully it all works out at the end. But yeah, to me, a Byard and Bryant combination in that secondary would be a nice way to go into next season.
Either way, Al Harris getting his hands on this ball of clay and just being able to mold him into his perfect safety back there is just awesome. Yeah, they're probably letting Byard kind of test the market, see where he's at. He is a 31-year-old safety, but like you said, he brings so much in and out of the locker room. We saw him pre-game warm-up. He was always the guy rallying the troops, getting them ready to go. So, yeah, I love this signing. Would love to have Byard back. We brought some linebackers. We brought back DeMarco Jackson on a 2-year, $10 million deal, which was great. And we also signed Devin Bush, the former Michigan Wolverine, has kind of been around the league. As his latest stop was in Cleveland, where he played really well. Do you have thoughts on Devin Bush?
Yeah, Devin Bush was a former top 10 pick, coming out of Michigan. This is a kid that went 10th overall to the Steelers. And I think this is a guy that was very productive. Again, the theme here is speed and athleticism. Bush is 27 years old. He ran a 4.440 coming out of Michigan, a 1.51 10-yard split, 40-inch vertical. So this is a very athletic linebacker. And Aldo's on the head right there, Aldo. Speed at linebacker. That's what they want. DeMarco Jackson brings some of that as well. We saw that last year, how when he was inserted in there for when TJ Edwards was out, you saw how his ability, speed to be able to crash down and get some penetration, whether as a blitzer or even in run defense. You saw him make an impact there. And I think this is the same thing here with Devin Bush. The only thing with Bush is he kind of floundered a little bit after being a top 10 pick with the Steelers, and then ended up going with Cleveland. But this past year, he was a beast. With the Browns, he had this past year. He had let's see, I have the numbers here in front of me. I think 125 tackles last year with Cleveland, 7 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 8 passes defense. So 3 interceptions, 2 of which he returned to the house. So speed, young guy, ability to make plays on the football, turn the ball over, and obviously with Bush's scenario there for last year, scored twice on 3 of his 3 interceptions. He scored, took 2 of them back to the house for pick sixes. So that's the theme here. Not huge guys, not guys that are earmarked to be day one signees, but they picked and chose. They wanted young guys, they wanted speed guys, and linebacker was a position obviously they needed to kind of fortify that and bring in some young guys there with speed, and that's what they did here with Bush, and obviously also re-signing DeMarco Jackson. Now, our next week, we were targeting off-ball linebacker, which I'm still going to go ahead and get into in terms of that position group in the draft, because I still think they still might go ahead and bring in another linebacker or 2 here. We'll see what happens. But, yeah, definitely a position of need. Another one of these kids that, top 10 pick, found a little bit of a hard time, if you will. And then now last year had a great bounce back year with the Browns. And I think the Bears are kind of hoping that last year's Devin Bush was the Devin Bush that they're getting from here on out. So another exciting young, addition to that defense, adding again more speed and more playmaking ability.
Absolutely. And then the last few signings, the Bears bringing back some of their own. Daniel Hardy, who they love in special teams. Case Keenum, who they love having in that quarterback room, and some rumors floating around about Bagent being, floated out there as trade rumors. They're looking for a 2nd-round pick. Rumors are the Steelers offered a 3rd, but they're kind of playing back and forth with negotiations, and they bring back Braxton Jones on a 1-year, $10 million deal. That broke literally a few minutes before we went live tonight. First, I'm going to go backwards on these. Do you think the Braxton Jones signing, because a lot of people, the Lions released Taylor Decker, their offensive tackle. A lot of people were kind of connecting the dots of him coming to Chicago to play left tackle for a year for us. Is there any chance that this Braxton Jones signing kind of puts a damper on that, or do you think they still maybe could do that?
I believe so. I think now you're looking at Braxton Jones as your potential day one starting left tackle last year. Some of the people that are around Braxton Jones, I have some connections to, and I was told vehemently that he was never 100% last year. He was never really fully recovered from that gruesome ankle injury he suffered in the season finale 2 years ago in Green Bay. So, Braxton wanted an opportunity to come back, and he wanted to be able to prove himself and given a fair shot. So I believe that numbers are a 1-year, $10 million deal. I'm not sure how much of that $10 million is guaranteed. So if that's all guaranteed, that pretty much is your starting left tackle. And then one thing about Decker, and I made the same correlation, Detroit, Ben Johnson, his history there, him being released. I thought maybe that might have been your 1-year, stopgap left tackle fill-in. But some of the stuff that I've heard is like, he's pretty beaten up, and he wants a lot of big money. So I think with the way the Bears are right now in terms of salary cap, obviously I think they see Ozzie as their potential future left tackle. So They're not going to invest in a young guy or someone, that's younger, if you will, with a long-term deal. So I think bringing back Braxton Jones was always probably their best case scenario. Let him and Theo Bennett, go ahead and compete there for left tackle. If Karan Amagaji decides to, do something there as well, that he could also have opportunity there as well. So the one thing we learned with Ben Johnson was, he will protect his left tackle, right?
Yeah.
So the thing is, so even if it is Braxton Jones and he still is the same Braxton Jones that we're used to, athletic, can get out in front in space and be really good there, but could struggle against power. Or last year he was really struggling in terms of his recovery ability as well, and that might have been because of the injury, the lingering effects of the injury. Ben Johnson will be able to go ahead and protect him, right? So that's what I think is going to happen. I think Braxton, him coming back for that 1-year deal, I think that kind of cements that position, and then it'll be a 3-headed monster going into training camp, and the best man of those 3 will probably be the starting left tackle into next year, and then obviously now the wait then happens for Ozzie. We'll see how quickly Ozzie Trapilo comes back. That is a hard injury to come back with. So just kind of my opinion and my advice to everyone is, don't expect Ozzie Trapilo to play next year. I think he takes a whole year off, and that's why then you go into the 2027 season with a fully healthy, rested Ozzie Trapilo battling for left tackle. So yeah, to answer your question, AC, I think Braxton Jones and/or Theo Bennett will be your starting left tackle next year.
Yeah, well, Aldo broke down the contract for us. It's $5 million base salary and up to $5 million in incentives. That's a fantastic deal. If he's your starting left tackle for the year, that's you just can't beat that. You're not going to find that anywhere else. Case Keenum, like I said,
I know the Bears were sniffing around Trent Williams. Him and the 49ers are having some contract dispute there, so I'm not sure if that went anywhere or not. But obviously, with this signing, I think that pretty much kind of seals that. I mean, I could be shocked or surprised with another move here, but today as of now, I think that is your potential starting left tackle there.
Yeah, I saw the Trent Williams news pop up on NFL Network before we went live. They said he was on the trade block, but the biggest issue they're having is coming to a deal money-wise, and I think he's making $37-38 million, and he wants a little more.
Yeah, and also he's up there in age. He's 38 years old. I believe he's 38 years old. So, he wouldn't be a long-term fix anyway, but he'd be more of that 1-year, 2-year guy, veteran guy who still plays at a pretty good high level. I think that would have been a nice fit there for the Bears. But obviously, money matters here. And then if you're up against the cap and you have other needs, obviously on the defensive side, going this route with bringing back a Braxton Jones for a 1-year deal for modest guaranteed money, I think is probably the smartest way to go.
Yeah. Aldo's got a good question for us here. He says, do you think the Bears should look for trade back opportunities into the second round if they don't see or if someone wants to come up at 25? What are your thoughts, Danny?
I'm always up for trading back and recouping more picks. The heart of this draft, is in that 50 to 75 so far from what I'm looking at here range, and you get a bunch of guys in the second, third round are going to come in and be starters within early on in their careers. So I think that'll be a great opportunity to trade back. The only problem is you're going to have to want someone to come up and trade up to get somebody and give up draft capital to move up and back in the first round. So typically that always happens for quarterbacks, right? And obviously this is a draft that's not heavy in quarterbacks, especially in the first couple of rounds. So unless a guy like Ty Simpson is dropping and then there's a team that says, hey, I'm going to go up and get him, that's what typically teams do. Unless another great player drops, I don't foresee it. But that's the thing is, like, if you can trade back and if you have a glut of players, say like you have 5 or 6 players, and if you trade back in the top of the second round, for example, and you can still have 2 or 3 of those players there on the board for you, I think that's the wise thing to do, especially if you have so many needs along that defensive line, and also someone else like this I talked about earlier, running back. If you want a speed running back, you want a speed receiver as well. So that's always the best case scenario, to always recoup more picks, but you're gonna have to someone's gonna have to want to come up and get that pick. So
right,
works out.
Yeah, I would love to trade back as well. We'd have to see who falls. Sometimes teams will trade up for a pass rusher if they're there, but this is a pretty deep pass rusher class is what everyone is saying. So maybe that might not be the case this year. Speaking of draft picks, it came out today. I know we're going off on all these tangents. It came out today that the Bears will not receive their comp picks, their compensatory picks for Ian Cunningham getting a GM job in Atlanta, which I think is absolute bush league. You set up the Rooney Rule to where minority candidates are given more opportunities, and he literally went from assistant GM to a GM. Everybody, both in the Bears and in Atlanta, have said this is the guy making the decisions. And for whatever reason, the NFL just says, no, not like that. Like it just doesn't make sense to me, Danny. We should have got 2 third-round picks, one this year and one next year, and that's one less pick to help bolster this team. And it really ticks me off. I think Roger Goodell needs to do something about it. What do you think?
Yeah, me too. Like when it was first, when it was first announced that Ian was potentially getting that job, but then I forgot who reported that the Bears wouldn't be eligible for a comp pick. I'm like, wait, that doesn't make sense. You know what? What do you mean? He's got the GM position, and that's how the rule is written, right? And then when at the combine where Ian came out and said, "I'm doing everything a GM does," I don't see why the Bears don't get one. There's a before the combine, a previous video where Matt Ryan is saying basically,
right,
this is Ian Cunningham. He's going to be doing the talent acquisition and all that stuff, basically what stuff that a GM does. And then Ryan Poles said, that they had kind of petitioned the league and talked to the league, and hope was that they, league would kind of change their mind and give them their due, which is, their third round comp picks. Right. And then today that the picks were announced, and the Bears didn't have anything. So I don't know if that's still in the works, right? I don't know if that's because I haven't heard anything from the Bears officially. The only thing, we assume now. I know there was a report here locally. Courtney Cronin from ESPN reported that the Bears are elected to get the third round comp picks, and that was maybe a couple of days ago over the weekend. So I think now, in which and then this obviously the comp picks were announced. Bears don't have a comp pick. Obviously the Bears haven't commented on them, so I'm holding out hope that the league is still kind of weighing and deciding that they'll eventually give them a comp pick, but it does sound grim right now, and it is unfair. It is unfair, yeah. And it is something where now teams could say, all right, we can just write the contract a certain way where this team A will not have opportunity to get a comp pick, and it's only going to hurt the candidate, right? Because then now the team's going to say, well, if I'm not getting a comp pick, why should I let you get my assistant GM? Right. For example, right? So it's BS. It's not in the way the rule was written. It's not in the way the rule was meant to happen to be. So hopefully, like I said, I'm not giving up hope. It doesn't look good, but but if you don't get a pick, the Bears do not get a pick for Ian Cunningham, then I think the NFL is obviously another thing that's flawed and that they should look into heavily and fix.
Yeah. Otto says owner meeting is next week. That's the last chance.
Yep.
I'm holding out
hope as well.
George McCaskey needs to get his big boy pants on and go petition the league and appeal and anything that he can do to get this done. Because like you said, Danny, that's just going to open this loophole to teams in the future of saying, yeah, we hired this guy, but he's not the decision maker. Or, it'd be like the Bears saying Kevin Warren's the decision maker, and then the Chiefs wouldn't have got the comp picks for when we hired Ryan Poles. Right. It's just it just doesn't make any sense. Why make the rule if it's going to be loopholes and ways around it?
Because technically, the Ryan Poles could have blocked it. He could have said, no, if it's a lateral move, I'm not allowing the Falcons to hire him. But he didn't want to do that to Ian Cunningham. He also didn't want to do that to his friend Matt Ryan. So that's why he let the interview happen. He let Ian Cunningham leave. But Ryan Poles could have blocked this move if he wanted to, if the league was going to kind of hold him to that kind of sentiment, saying that he's not going to define the decision maker in Atlanta. It's Matt Ryan. Then Ryan Poles is going to be like, all right, I'll play hardball too. But Ian Cunningham cannot take the job. But like I said, that's not something that he wanted to do. It not for Ian, and also not to make his buddy Matt Ryan look bad either.
Yeah. Just to finish up our signings, like I said, Case Keenum was brought back to round out the quarterback room. They love his leadership in there, and Daniel Hardy comes back as a special teamer. You got anything on either of these guys, Danny?
Well, the other thing I want to touch on real quick, I don't know if you were planning on talking about it, is the center they brought in from New England that they acquired last Friday with the trade. So in terms of the re-signings, that Daniel Harding, core special teams player. I love that, bringing him back. DeMarco Jackson, we got a touchdown. I think it was a good re-signing there as well. So Case Keenum, 2-year contract. So that, you talked about earlier about in terms of some of the rumors with Tyson Bagent. I wonder if that indicate that there's some progress there with maybe a potential Tyson Bagent trade. I know Ben Johnson loves Tyson Bagent, and I think the only reason he would let him go would be just to let Tyson an opportunity to go ahead and start and potentially be a starting quarterback. But it was curious that it was Steelers, right? So is Aaron Rodgers not coming back? Or are the Steelers bringing in potentially a Tyson Bagent to compete with Aaron Rodgers? It's all confusing. So that's what I think is like, I'm not sure I buy the whole Steelers rumor, but who knows? We'll see. But yeah, I mean, the 2-year contract for Case Keenum, there were some rumors that Case had retired and that the Bears might have hired him as an assistant coach or something like that. But obviously those are just false rumors. But I like Case being back there. I like him, in that room with, Caleb and potentially a Tyson Bagent as well. So I think he's a good veteran voice, a good veteran presence. But if you want, I want to move on to Garrett Bradbury, because I know that was a big letdown by a lot of fans. And I'm going to be 100% like when I heard Garrett Bradbury, I was like, because I had the whole, they're going to go out there and make a splash because obviously they had cleared some of the cap space. I thought they were going to get a, Linderbaum, even though the money was ridiculous. I think he ended up with $27 million a year from the Raiders. Yeah. McGovern was another guy, Connor McGovern from the Bills, another guy I liked a lot, but he got, I believe, was 13 or 14 million from the Bills. So obviously the Bears weren't looking to spend that much at center. So they went and got Garrett Bradbury, and a little bit about Bradbury. So, when you do the measurables, you kind of put up Bradbury versus Dahlman, very similar players, right? Both very intelligent, coming out of college, both, obviously natural centers, very athletic, right? Bradbury, 6'3", 306. First of all, Bradbury was a first round pick, 18th overall by the Vikings. Okay. Dahlman, 6'3", 299. Both in terms of their arm length, similar, almost 32-inch for both. The 10-yard split, very similar. Bradbury runs a 1.70 10-yard split, Dahlman at 1.74. And again, that's very, very important for especially zone offenses, right? Where, we want that center to chip and release to that next level defender. That 10-yard split is very important. So I think those guys athletically, they matched up, similarly physically, they matched up, the same way as well. And then when you put on the tape, both have same strengths and both have the same weaknesses, right? Both are athletic, move, zone scheme, wide stretch, if you will, centers, guys that can, move laterally. They have the athletic ability to move and maintain their blocks on their defensive linemen, guys that can flip their hips into the gap, with those athletic feet and be able to go and, seal off any sort of backside pursuit and all that stuff. So both are pretty good, are better, I should say, in the run game than as pass blockers, right? So and I think both, where they both kind of struggle is taking on power, right? I think Dahlman, we saw towards the end of last year, a lot of bull rushers, in his face, kind of rocking back, getting him rocked back on his heels and falling into Caleb's lap. So I think we saw a lot of that there as well. We saw a lot of that with Bradbury as well as, with this time with Minnesota. So, they're very similar players. Obviously, Dahlman coming off that Pro Bowl year. Although for me personally, I was shocked. I don't know how you feel, Aaron. I was shocked that Dahlman made the Pro Bowl last year because I thought he was good. I just didn't think it was Pro Bowl good, but that's neither here or there. Anyway, but with Bradbury, started every game last year, obviously on a team that went to the AFC Championship game and played in the Super Bowl. The fact that he's got a relationship with Joe Thuney, they were both college teammates and roommates back at NC State. That's going to be huge because that's a big part of what you bring in here at center is knowing that you got Joe Thuney there next to him, and even Jonah Jackson on the other side. So I think that's something that they also looked at there as well. So obviously, and the big thing with Bradbury at Minnesota was he was always hurt. He always injured and missed time, and then never really got into the groove of things. And obviously talked about being bullied by power rushers. I think that's why eventually Minnesota said, all right, we're done with him. They let him go. He goes to New England and started every game and had, I believe, I think I saw no holding penalties at all this season with Bradbury. So although it wasn't a big name, and although initially the disappointment kind of kicked in, but if you go through and look at it, this is, I think, a smart pickup here. It's obviously a short-term pickup, so that's why I think going into the draft, center is going to be a position of need still. It might not be a day one, need, but definitely, day 2, early day 3, you could see them and get their center. And the good news is, there's centers here that match this criteria in terms of what Ben Johnson wants, which is athletic zone type centers, the guys that can get out in front and reach that second level. And we'll get into a couple of those names that I've talked about, and I'll highlight more in the upcoming weeks, and also do scouting profiles and post them on Shipman Draft Scout. So I think that's a good solid addition. Again, not the big splash that everyone kind of was anticipating and hoping for, but I think Bradbury, with the help of Jonah Jackson and Joe Thuney, will be an okay addition, and we won't see that big of a difference. At least I'm hoping, knock on wood, from last year's interior of the offensive line.
Yeah. A couple of things. I love getting a starting center for a 5th round pick in next year's draft. The fact that I know you don't really follow PFF statistics and stuff. This was a down year for him, but in the past he's been very good in those PFF grades. Like you said, his own blocker, can get out in space and do all the things that Ben Johnson loves. I love that he's got Thuney and Jackson around him, and really the ability to gel as a unit. And I love that he's an experienced center, because I think they really look for that. They wanted Dahlman to do a lot of the calls with Caleb being so young. I don't know if they'll put more on Caleb's plate this year, if they'll just continue to have the center do those calls, but I think that's a big deal. And like I said, a 5th round pick for next year. What are your thoughts on Luke Newman, who's kind of his backup right now? We brought him in last year. Greg Gabriel did a scouting report on him and really liked him at guard or center. Do you think he could Aldo said maybe he could take over for him next year even?
Yeah, I'm a big Luke Newman fan as well. Obviously, Newman played at Stony Brook, left tackle, went to Michigan State, played left guard, and then last year was a backup guard for the Bears. And I think whenever he got an opportunity to play, I like the kid. I saw him in preseason and also in some spot duty here and there in the regular season. I think Newman was a kid that really has a bright future. Got hurt towards the tail end of the season. I know he was taking some snaps at center in training camp and some of the practices that I was able to view. So I think that's a guy that potentially could be your future replacement if you don't end up getting someone in this upcoming draft. He could be he could be the heir apparent, if you will. They could groom him to be the next center. So that could be an option as well. And then that's one of the names that I kind of thought of when Dahlman retired was, if they go big at left tackle, for example, or they go big at pass rusher, and you want to kind of save some money, maybe Newman could have been an option. But yeah, I think that's a good point. That I should have brought up Luke Newman there. He could be the heir apparent, right? So if they go through this entire draft without picking a center, that right there is a great indication that they see Luke Newman as potentially their next future starting center moving on.
Yeah. We do have a list of centers to talk about coming out of the draft, but I just wanted to ask you before we completely move on, is there any other free agents that you're looking for out there that you think we could bring in? I'm biased. Okay. I wanted the big splash. I'm an hour from Cincinnati. I wanted Trey Hendrickson in my building. I wanted him rushing the opposite edge of Montez Sweat. He's still out there, but
he's still out there. So don't give up hope.
Yeah, it seems like I don't know. Maybe he's outpriced himself. I don't know. Maybe they're just negotiating back and forth. Anyone come to mind that you wanted to talk about?
Well, nothing. No one that other obviously than Trey Henderson, which may be a pipe dream. I agree with you there, AC. He might be someone that while looks and sounds good, but that might be someone that they're not going to be able to kind of fit in the cap. So I think it's curious in terms of why he hasn't signed already. I expect him to be one of the first guys signed. I think Philadelphia losing Jalen Phillips, I think might have kind of brought Philly now into the game, and obviously there are some rumblings. Maybe the Packers were kind of sniffing around Trey Hendrickson, which would be kind of interesting there as well. So I think Dallas getting Rashawn Gary, I think they may have moved on from Hendrickson. I know the Colts were heavily rumored on Hendrickson, and they end up getting Arden Key, which is a modest 2-year, $20 million contract. I'm not sure if the Colts are totally out of the Hendrickson deal, but I just got to, and I could be totally wrong, right? But I just got this feeling that the Bears, created all this cap space, that they're going to make a splash on one of these positions. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's not Hendrickson. Maybe they're just going to go ahead and do the fill-in spots here and there. So we'll see how it goes. But is there a free agent out there that I'm pounding the table for? Honestly, there isn't. I mean, Tariq Woolen, the corner from Seattle, is an interesting guy. John Franklin Myers, the tackle, defensive tackle from Denver, he signed with the Titans. He was a guy that I was kind of interested in see if they bring him in at defensive tackle. So free agency wise, there isn't anyone. Obviously, Kevin Byard. I want Kevin Byard resigned. So hopefully that gets taken care of.
Yeah.
But there isn't anyone out there that I'm pounding the table for. Obviously, Trey Hendrickson would be the guy. Actually, I'm trying to think now who besides Hendrickson, who's the top free agent remaining. I'm trying to. Really isn't much out there. It wasn't a great class to begin with, right? So, there isn't anything here, like Leo Chanel, a linebacker from the Chiefs, I thought about maybe, but, bringing back DeMarco Jackson, obviously bringing in Devin Bush, that's no longer going to be, I think I do know they're looking for a speed receiver. So I just don't see anyone out here in free agency that's going to be an option there. That might be more of a draft, pick there. So, to answer your question, no, there isn't really anyone out there. And again, it was a down free agent year. It wasn't a great free agent class.
Yeah.
Other than Trey Hendrickson, there wasn't anyone out there that pounding the table for saying, hey, go get this guy.
Prior to them trading for Bradbury, did you have your eyes on Linderbaum? Did you think they would take the big swing at him?
Well, sure.
Did you think he would fit if they had?
Yeah, that would have been the ideal fit. 25 years old, Pro Bowl center, hitting the prime of his career. But when I heard $20 million, I was like, whoa, that was a little bit jarring, and they ended up signing for $27 million. So obviously, a couple of teams that wanted him. They had cap space like the Commanders and obviously the Raiders, and I believe the Titans might have been involved there as well. So that's just a lot for me for a center. Now you are getting a 25-year-old guy in the prime of his career, so that you will lock that up for a while there. But just I just that's a lot. That's a lot to invest in a center. Knowing that you haven't even gotten your left tackle position straightened out yet. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, so there isn't anyone really, guys, in free agency that I'm like saying, let's go get. We need to get this guy. Obviously, Hendrickson would be a nice get, but I just don't think that's reality right now.
Fizo Joe says, if Hendrickson's asking for more than Phillips, I'll pass. I think he's a better player than Phillips, and Phillips has more of an injury history.
Phillips is always injured, and that's a lot of money that Carolina. I don't know what the guarantee money was. I think it was in the $80 million. The other kid was the guy from the Chargers, Ofe. I think he went for a boatload of money to the Commanders, and he really. It's funny that kid at Penn State, the year he was drafted, I think only had like 2 career sacks at Penn State. Right. Won in the first round by the Ravens. Had a solid 3 or 4 years with the Ravens. Got traded last year from Baltimore to the Chargers. Ended up getting 7.5 sacks plus 3 additional sacks in the playoffs. Ended up the season with 12.5 sacks and hits free agency and now cashes in big time with the Commanders. So he was a guy that I was hoping the Bears would kind of stay away from because he was just so hot and cold. The players that are not consistent like that and just get that spike in sacks because, they say sacks come in bunches, right? So I think, he ran into a bunch of sacks last year and next thing you know, he cashed in. And the fact that the Chargers let him go, he was a 25-year-old, 26-year-old, pass rusher. So that doesn't usually happen. And that kind of gives me some red flags there. So luckily they didn't sign him. But yeah, it's a class that really isn't that impressive, like I've been saying, and there isn't anybody here. I'm like, oh, you get this guy, it'll be set. But can you fill some fringe spots around the roster? Sure, you can make some nice free agent signings, but I wouldn't do anything here in the next 3 days because this is where you overpay for players, right? You just kind of like let that first wave kind of go through. Once you've gotten your needs, kind of taken care of, and then you kind of wait and see what kind of trickles down here. Towards the tail end there, and then you kind of pick and choose of guys that can fill spots on your roster. So that's what I would do.
Dial Dangbo apparently is motivated. I guess he tweeted that out. Jojo Loco says, save your money and extend Darnell Wright. Absolutely agree. We got to get Darnell Wright locked up. And I kind of agree with what Brian Gilmore says. Just draft your own defensive ends and develop them. We talked about that in our first episode of Draft on Tap this season where we talked about Zion Young and TJ Parker and all those guys that we like.
You're from Miami. Yeah, a couple of guys. And this is going to be a draft where you can get a defensive end, late first round where the Bears are at, or even early second round if they trade back. We talked about that trade back option. They can get some guys that can come in and contribute. I just there isn't really that standout guaranteed Myles Garrett type in this draft, but there's guys that could fulfill give you 6-7 sacks, right? Year in, year out, and you can be part of a group there in terms of that defensive line. Because remember, Dennis Allen likes to bring them in waves, right? So you can't just have one guy making all the sacks or making getting all the reps. So you're gonna have a bunch of guys coming in and making plays. So that's why I think they're trying to build that depth, behind the starters, and then plug in here, internally in terms of the inside defensive tackle there as well. So I never thought they were going to go out and make a big splash at edge, like for Hendrickson or anybody else. So and that's kind of played out here as we've seen. That was a hope, because you always want that guy that can get you 10 to 12 sacks, right? But it's you have to pay for that, and especially in free agency. So look what the Raiders are doing. Raiders are overpaying big time for players, because players don't want to usually go play for a bad franchise, right? And the same thing with the Jets. So you don't want to do that. I think the Bears have turned the corner where they don't have to overpay for guys anymore. They can just kind of go out there, make their case, and bring guys in and selectively fill holes on the roster in free agency.
The Raiders and Titans definitely were paying a lot today, which again, those are teams trying to turn things around, a whole new coaching staff. They needed new players in there to try and turn their franchise around. I was going to say something. I completely forgot what I was going to say. Oh, so it's a copycat year, Seattle Seahawks kind of did that, like you were talking about, not having just the one dominant pass rusher that you had to look out for, where they didn't have the one dominant guy, but they all got to the quarterback and had a pretty good number of pressures and sacks and stuff. So maybe
even last year, towards the tail of last year, even especially that Rams game, you saw Dennis Allen get into his bag of tricks and start dialing up some pressures, disguising stuff where, even Sean McVay after the game, he said, it was on NFL Films, Mike, he said, you kicked our ass, mad respect. McVay said that Dennis Allen, what he schemed up versus their offense, really kind of, took them out of their rhythm there. So, we know Dennis Allen can do that. So now just got to give him some of the toys he needs. We know he likes using his secondary, to provide pressure, obviously linebackers, and then up front plays a lot of those end games, in terms of twists and stunts and all that stuff. So I know that there's a guy out there right now, Cameron Jordan, 37 years old. I understand that he's up there in age, but he still had 10.5 sacks last year with the Saints. Maybe you could bring him in for 1 year, has the familiarity with Dennis Allen. His time with New Orleans. Maybe he can take a flyer in a 1 year deal if you're looking for an edge guy just to kind of bring in there in the mix. I wouldn't mind doing something like that. But it's kind of committing big time long term money to anybody out there in the free agent market. It's really not. There's no one out there right now that I really, really am pounding the table for.
Absolutely, I agree. We'll get into the center class. The draft class at center. Well, we didn't do the deep dive, the tape study. You got notes on some of these guys. Logan Jones from Iowa is a name that I've heard. Really, I kind of heard him since the combine, but of course, doing my Barfly Tailgate show with Tooch, he loves his Iowa Hawkeyes. He's a zone center too, right? So, what are your thoughts on Logan Jones?
Yeah, Logan Jones is a guy that coming into the season was very high, if not the top center on my board coming into the college football season. And again, we talked about guys that Ben Johnson wants, right? And we talked about athletic guys, zone center guys that can get out in space and be effective at the second and third level. Be able to do a reach block, which means reach that inside three technique because he's athletic and he's quick enough and he's got the athletic ability and he has pretty good in terms of using his hands and getting leverage and all that stuff. So watching Logan Jones, obviously you talked about it, Iowa, they produce terrific offensive linemen throughout their history, in terms of what they produce and send to the NFL level. And I think Logan Jones falls in that category. Very athletic. This is a guy that played both sides of the line of scrimmage in high school, was a defensive end and defensive tackle and offensive tackle in high school, and also lettered in track and basketball. So this is a guy that's a pretty good, well-rounded athlete. Started at defense actually at Iowa, and then switched. I believe it was 2022. Switched him over to center, and he's got 50 career starts at center. He's a 4-year starter. On a consensus All-American this past year, a team captain. So that's what you're looking for in his leader. And 6'3", 299. So he's not a big guy. 30 3/4 arm length, shorter arms than you prefer. But again, it's a center, and a lot of these guys are used to the inside guys are used to having the shorter arms. But what he does is, this is a guy that's again athletic. You talk about, being able to move your feet, reach, complete reach blocks on those defensive tackles, get out if you have to pull and get out and get around the edge and be a lead blocker and lead your running back out into the open field. And again, talked about it so many times, to be able to chip on an interior defensive lineman, help your guard, and then release out to that next level linebacker, get to the linebacker, lock him up, steer him, seal him off, create that crease for the running back. So I think Logan Jones fits that profile. And I think, he's not made for every offensive system. So if you're a team that runs predominantly a lot of power, a lot of gap stuff, Logan Jones is not your, cup of tea. But for the Bears who want athletic guys, fast guys, two guys that can get out and are well coached, I think this is a guy that's might be very, very high on Ben Johnson's wish list, as well as Dan Rochar. So, he's a guy that we talked about, that third round area. We talked about with Ian Cunningham and that comp pick. That would have been a nice area in terms of you might get a guy like Logan Jones. So, right now I've got a day 2 pick on him, or grade on him, I should say. So, we're talking about late second round, early third round. So with those 2 second round picks, depending how much they like this kid and how much they feel like, he's going to fall back, or where, in terms of how the draft is going and where he potentially could go, they may pull a trigger and pick a guy like Logan Jones, with one of those second round picks, or maybe even trade back and get an early third round pick and select him there. So Logan Jones from Iowa is a guy that I think fits ideally in what Ben Johnson wants to do. And I think he's a kid to keep an eye on come draft time.
Well, if he drops to that second round, like you said, we got 2 picks there, so maybe
he's not a first round pick, and he might not even be a second round pick, depending on what the team and the needs and all that wants. But I definitely think he's a day 2 pick, depending on we'll see how everything goes. But I think late second, early third round is probably his range. Anywhere in there, you could see a kid like Logan Jones go.
So you don't think he'd fall to us in the third? He'll be gone before we get on the board, probably.
Third round pick, you're looking at pick 89. He might be there. Yeah. It all depends on how the draft is going. If there's a run on offensive linemen, or especially run on interior offensive linemen, this is a good draft to have for interior offensive linemen as well. So I think that's why it falls in the range or in the favor of the Bears there in some of their needs there. So I think obviously center wasn't a primary need heading into this offseason for me.
Right.
The Gallman news, and obviously, getting the Bradbury trade. He's only on a 1-year deal. I think this is something where they're going to go in and they're going to kind of back up. If Newman is not their future center, I think there might be a spot here where they go in and they find their future center. Maybe let him sit 1 year behind a Bradbury, get stronger, bigger and stronger, and then next year he'll go in and either compete or have the job next year. So I think center now is a prime spot where the Bears could be looking to pick, preferably in that third round range.
Yeah, even though the Drew Dahlman news caught us off guard, I don't think it caught the Bears off guard because they seemed ready to move on. I mean, there was rumors that they had brought in Tyler Biadasz that day for a visit. We don't know if that was true or not, but either way.
Yeah, that's one guy I'm glad they didn't sign, because I watched a lot of Commanders game last year. Don't ask me why, but a lot of times they're on my TV for some reason, and he looked bad. Biadasz looked bad last year. Start off with obviously a Wisconsin guy, another school that produces good offensive linemen. Started off really well with the Cowboys, ended up going to Washington, had a pretty good first couple of years with the Commanders. And I don't know if he was injured. Obviously, I don't follow the Commanders very closely, but he just looked like he was a step slow. Could have been dealing with an injury. I want to be fair to Tyler Biadasz, but just the fact that they being the Chargers gave him $10 million to sign. Right. I think that tells you that in terms of how much they want, and they're more of a power scheme team. Now they have Mike McDaniel in there, so that they may run some more wide zone stuff. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm glad they and if I had to pick between Bradbury and Biadasz, I think I like the Bradbury acquisition.
Well, I liked Biadasz, but it was a name to me. I'm not a tape guy. I liked him at Wisconsin. I liked him coming out. The next guy that you got is Hecht out of Kansas State.
Yep.
Is it Sam Hecht? Is
Sam
that correct?
Hecht, yeah, Sam Hecht. Yeah, similar vein in terms of like Logan Jones. Athletic. Moves type of center, 6'4", 303. A sub 32-inch arms at 31 5/8 is what he came in at the combine. 173 10-yard split, and I keep talking about that. That to me is more important than their overall 40 yards. 40-yard dash time. So 1.73 10-yard split. So it tells you this is the guy that can get out to the next level, get to those, linebackers, so on and so forth. 2-year starter with Kansas State there, 25 career starts at center. He was a two-time, he's a 2025 All Big 12 first team voted by the league coaches, right? So again, the size, the athletic frame, the ability, is easy mover in space. He uses his hands again to gain leverage and to control, to wash out defensive tackles, out of the picture. Talk about a guy that knows how to, out leverage bigger guys. Explodes out of his stance. Easily gets around the edge to lead block and reach the edge defender on pulls. So if you're going to run some gap with him, he's a guy that can get out in front and be a pull blocker there. Can chip and release to that next level with ease. Lateral agility to shuffle and slide while maintaining his body contact with a defender. So again, these athletic type of moving blocks that you're going to ask these guys to do in a zone scheme, Sam Heck can do it. Athletic enough to where he can kick out and block edge defenders. So a lot of times you see him kind of kick out of the center spot and kind of rush towards the edge guy in the end and be able to take him on one-on-one. Again, the lateral agility to be able to set, shuffle, mirror, and pass pro. Keep in mind that this is a guy, he does have some limitations in terms of size and length, but the way he uses his athletic ability, uses his hands to gain leverage, and to be able to take on power as well. You see him in terms of when he anchors, wide base, resets his feet, and is able to kind of hold off and throw that power rusher in his face. Now, there are times where, the bigger defenders get the best of him. Now, you can see him get kind of, mauled, if you will, tossed aside because he isn't that big and strong. So another one of these guys that you can kind of bring in and let him kind of sit there, in a year of an NFL type of, training program where you can get him bigger, a little bit more stronger. I think he could be a guy that can, come in and start a year later on. So, for me, Logan Jones, Sam Heck, those are guys that really kind of fall in that range of Ben Johnson types in terms of what he wants to see in his centers. So those are two names right there. The third name I'll just go ahead and jump to him right now is Jake Slater from Florida, the Gator. This is more of a bigger body in terms of height, 6'5", 303. Chose Florida over schools like Auburn, Arkansas, Missouri, and Florida State. 3-year starter at Florida with 33 career starts under his belt, a 2-time All-SEC first team member, a team captain in 2024, and a 4-time academic SEC honor roll. So he's just a smart kid, right? I talked about size, efficient mover, talk about his quickness, short area quickness, 1.74 10-yard split. Again, you're going to see the trait here I'm going to keep talking about is that athleticism, right? The lateral agility, the ability to get out of your stance and get downfield and get to that next level defender. That is huge, and that's important for what we see Ben Johnson and Dan Rochar want with their centers. Can strike and steer defenders, can get out and pull comfortably in space. It's not a kid that looks awkward when he's got out there by himself and with grass all around him. He's a guy that can be a lead blocker for your back out in space there. Athletic, can flip his hips and seal off the backside pursuit from a defensive tackle. So all the traits that we're talking about athletically, this kid gives you. Obviously team captain. He's got 30 plus starts in his career. So I think these are guys, these three right here off the top of my head that I've seen so far fit that mold of what Ben Johnson and Dan Rochar want. So I think any of three guys, should, one or all three could be available with that pick 89 we talked about there earlier, AC. So, this could be a sweet spot here for where the Bears can go ahead and pluck their center of the future if it is not going to be Luke Newman.
Okay. The next one we have is Brian Parker II.
These next two, I haven't dug deep into their tape. So basically, both of these guys were tackles. Brian Parker II was a tackle at Duke, a right tackle, a 3-year starter, a right tackle, and then Trey Zahn III from Texas A&M. He's a 4-year starter at left tackle. But because of their size and because of their lack of length, they're being kicked inside by NFL scouts to either guard or center. Parker was at the combine was listed as a center, so that's where he's going to end up playing. And I go back to last year's a first round pick by the Buccaneers, Graham Barton. He was a starting left tackle for the Duke Blue Devils. they kicked him inside to center, and he was one of the you know a pretty good a prospect for them moving forward here. So same thing applies with Brian Parker. So obviously him being a right tackle, I'm going to be watching him playing right tackle. So I'm going to have to kind of analyze his tape in terms of his movement skills. Do I see any in his ability to get to that next level? So that's why I'm going to have to kind of dig some more into him. But yeah, that's a name to keep in mind as well as Brian Parker, the second from Duke, and then Trey Zahn, the third from Texas A&M. Obviously, a 4-year starter in the SEC. That's something that not to cough at, right? So, but he also is going to be kicked inside. Now with Zahn, there's talk about guard or center. So we'll see where he ends up. But these are more developmental players. Will they be able to come in and start next year, or if pressed into into emergency duty, can they come in and start? We'll have to kind of play it by ear and see. But those are two names I wanted to kind of bring out to the rest of the audience and say, all right, besides these three we already talked about, Logan Jones, Sam Heck, Jake Slaughter, Brian Parker the second from Duke, and Trey Zahn the third from Texas A&M are also center potential prospects, developmental type to keep an eye on. And we'll get more into these guys probably into, if not next week's show, then another one of these upcoming shows where we'll do some tape study and we'll show you some of the athletic traits and ability and how they project inside at center.
Well, the final one is Cameron Liu out of Auburn. Do you have anything on him? Did he play center at Auburn, or is he another guy where you're kicking him around?
Well, no, Liu played center at Auburn. He's more of the bigger guy. He's 6'3 and a half, 3'10", 32 and 3/8 arm lengths. He's a guy that I think could play. He's scheme versatile. I think he could play in a power gap scheme if you want him to, meaning power, trade, and all that stuff. And also, I think he could play. He's athletic enough where he could play some zone offense as well, some wide zone. But the only thing with him, the other thing I like about him, I should say, is he lettered in wrestling in high school, and we talked about it all the time. The offensive linemen that have a wrestling background, they're very good, projecting forward because of the fact that they use their hands to get leverage, out leverage their opponent. I think those guys, traditionally are very good interior offensive linemen, at the next level. So. Lettered in high school, 3-year starter for Auburn, team captain. The only thing with Liu is he's been dealing with some injuries, right? He had an MCL sprain versus Oklahoma early on, September of 2025, this past season, and then tore his ACL in October of 2025. So he's still recovering from his ACL, so he hasn't had any sort of testing or anything like that. So we'll see how where he's at. His medicals at the combine are huge for him in terms of giving the team some time for him in terms of when he could potentially, be available, right? Well, is he going to be on a PUP list starting his career off in the NFL? Is he a guy that could be ready, maybe, kind of on a little bit of limited workload heading into training camp, or is he going to be full go? So I think that's going to determine him. But I think, he's a guy that just kind of his tape, another one of these guys that could be in that third round range, but because of those medicals, you could pick this guy up maybe fourth round, maybe fifth round. I don't know. And then you could let him sit redshirt for a year. And then now you have yourself a future center as well. So Connor Liu from Auburn, medicals for him are going to be huge, but he's a little bit different from the other guys we talked about. He's a little bit more bigger in terms of stature, but also more versatile. The other guys are primarily zone scheme centers. I think Liu can play either or, so he's scheme versatile.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if the injuries are kind of really bad, maybe he falls all the way out of the draft. I mean, Ryan Poles historically has found guys, the UDFAs. I mean, last year was Jade Walker. The year before that was I can't remember, but Jack Sanborn, the linebacker, he was a UDFA. So Ryan Poles has a good eye for these guys that fall out of the draft that he can.
Liu is too good to fall out of the draft. He may fall. Excuse me, again, depending on his medicals. He tore his ACL in October. Right. So that's a 9 to 12 month recovery, injury, and you're never really the same until a year after that. So, one of these guys where you kind of, I don't want to call him, draft him and stash him, but that's what I was kind of looking at with Liu because of, again, his athletic ability, his stature, his ability to play either, scheme. I think he'd be a nice, attractive guy if you can get him because of his medicals, maybe, early on in day 3. But as a guy that's going to drop entirely out of the draft, I don't see that happening. He's just too good to I think someone will take a chance on him, draft him, and just, give him a redshirt year and just, let him heal up from that ACL injury.
Yeah, I love what you said about former wrestlers on the interior offensive line. They know how to use leverage in their hands and all that kind of stuff that you really need fighting in that phone booth. I did have some questions from the chat. I starred them for you. I told them get your questions in for Danny. Now they're kind of some are on topic, some are off, but I'm going to throw them at you here and get your thoughts. The first one is M Lanero 23. He said, "Who's going to be the wide receiver 3? Kind of happy Zacchaeus is gone. Think he used too much lube on his gloves last year." Do you have any thoughts of draft wide receiver, or we kind of talked about the free agents? I've heard Khalif Raymond kind of put out there because former Lion played with Ben Johnson there, so they're kind of connecting the dots of a speed receiver there. But what are your thoughts at wide receiver 3 position?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, right now we're going into. They're going to add to the room, right? Whether it's going to be a veteran free agent, which I think they will bring in a veteran free agent. Khalif Raymond is a nice name there. He's a guy who gives you also punt return ability as well.
Yeah,
we don't know what's going to happen with Duvernay. He's a free agent. They're going to bring him back. If he does, he's a potential number 3, number 4 receiver there as well. A guy we talked about earlier, Jade Walker. He talked about an undrafted free agent. Made some plays early on. He was making his name on special teams, and then towards the end, particularly that Packers game, caught that big touchdown, and then given some few opportunities, he started to show something there as well. So I think he's going to be in the mix there. There's a guy I like on the practice squad that last year really caught my eye in preseason. It's Maurice Alexander, a little diminutive, fast, quick twitch guy. Spread on the entire year on the practice squad. So I think he's a guy that's going to have an opportunity. But yes, I think they're going to bring in a veteran free agent. I think they also are going to draft one. And specifically, they're looking for speed. They're looking for someone that's going to give them that dynamic ability to be able to stretch the field, whether it's outside the numbers or in the slot. They want to be able to attack vertically, even on some of these crossing routes. They want receivers that can run away from defenders on some of these crossing routes. So they're going to add speed to that room. They're going to add bodies to that room. So right now, I think to answer the question, I don't know if your number 3 receivers on the roster. They might be. It could be Jade Walker, or it could be a rookie, or it could be a veteran that they're going to eventually sign.
Yeah. I mean, they trusted Jade Walker enough to go to him on 4th down with the game on the line against the Green Bay Packers. So they definitely got some trust in him. A guy that I've brought up a few times every chance I get, Barian Brown, used to play for my Kentucky Wildcats, transferred to LSU.
He ran a speed guy.
Yeah, he ran a 4.4, but I felt like he played faster than he ran at the combine. But I mean, the combine, that everybody tore it up so much. I mean, we had so many offensive. You were talking about athletic offensive linemen. It seemed like so many of them ran under a 5, and I mean that's crazy. Right. Unheard.
And another guy from LSU, I have him actually eye on and maybe 5th round range is Chris Hilton from LSU. He's another speed guy. Ended up going to the East-West Shrine game. From there, was called up to the Senior Bowl as well. So he's a guy to keep an eye on there. He's a guy, nice vertical strike. Doesn't have gaudy numbers at LSU, but for whatever reason, LSU had some issues last year in terms of getting offense. But but they have athletes. They have guys that can make plays. So Hilton from LSU is another speed receiver to keep an eye on in day 3 of the draft.
Yeah, Brian Kelly was down there with his family. Now he gets plenty of time to spend with
them. You do that better
than
I can't pull that off. So that's a great imitation of Brian Kelly and his Southern accent.
That's just my voice, man. The next question is from Cliff Victoria. He says, now that we have seen what the Bears are doing, will they draft defensive tackle or defensive end at 25, do you think?
They're still both are still needs, Cliff. I mean, Gallimore is not, like I say, he's a rotational guy. He's not a plug and play starter for me. So you still need, to add bodies at defensive tackle, and you still need to add, in my opinion, at least one more defensive end. So Dio, I know Aldo mentioned Dio is pumped up and motivated. That's great. But he's coming off an Achilles, and I believe that was in November. So I'm not sure, in terms of his health heading into this second season with the Bears, where is he going to be there in terms of medicals? If you bring in another edge rusher, do you kick him inside to defensive tackle possibly, or do you just put him in part of a rotation? I know they lost Dominique Robinson today. He's a guy that they used a lot on this season as one of their edge or base defensive ends. So, obviously there's a need there, prior to losing Robinson, now even more so because you lost a body. So, they're going to, bring in some guys there. Will it be a veteran, or will it be a draft pick, or will it be maybe both? But Gallimore was just a little sampling, in terms of defensive alignment. They have to bring some more in. And for me, if you're going to stay at 25, I think, and if the draft falls the way I think it may fall, I think interior defensive lineman, D tackle might be the way to go, because as you go down in the draft, second, third round, that group thins out greatly. Mm-hmm. Edge guys, whether it's Zion Young or Messidor or TJ Parker or some of these other guys, you can that's a more deeper position. So you could probably wait on those if you want to the second round. Will you get a perfect edge guy? No, but you're going to get a guy that's going to do something well, whether he's a run defender or with potential to be a pass rusher, or he's going to be a great pass rusher and could be a liability on run defense. So, you're going to have to pick and choose. And we talked about DA likes bringing in these guys in waves, right? So if you find a guy in the second, third round, that's a hell of a pass rusher off the edge. You can utilize that skill set and utilize him for what he is, which is a pass rusher, and then build him up to be a better run defender. So I think right now, if you stick at 25, my money is on defensive tackle. The only thing we haven't touched on, and we will touch on in future shows, is offensive tackle, right?
Yeah.
A class that's not deep, but there could be two names specifically for the Bears at 25 that intrigue me. And we'll get into those guys as we hit the offensive tackle group. But that could be a position if they're still in flux. Obviously Ozzy's still coming off that injury. You signed Braxton Jones, you kind of touched on earlier. Will they go for an offensive tackle with 25? My gut says no right now, but I would not throw that out of the question either. And we'll hit that group in the upcoming weeks here on Draft on Tap.
Absolutely. The next one kind of touches on that. He said, where do you see the Penn State defensive tackle, defensive end going? I'm assuming he's talking about Zane Durant of Penn State and Danny Dennis Sutton, the defensive end from Penn State. I think Danny Dennis, I don't want to answer for you, but I think Danny Dennis Sutton is one of those guys that you can maybe wait until like the third round. Hopefully he'll fall in your range.
Third round is probably where he's going to fall, in my opinion. He's a guy that, at least for me with Dennis Sutton, I always wanted more from him. He was consistent in terms of back-to-back years with 8.5 sacks. Had pressures on the quarterback. He's not a twitchy defensive end. He's more of a straight line guy, but he's got good length and a good size. And I think he's a guy that could potentially be a down and down out starter down the road. So he's a second round guy, possibly third round guy. But I think if I had to bet right now, he's probably going to go somewhere in that second round range. Zane Durant is a guy that we were talking about. A lot of names kind of throwing out there is this Peter Woods from Clemson in terms of a 3 technique. Defensive tackle first round. And for me, while Woods is a highly touted prospect coming into the season, was in my top 5 in terms of Sheeman Draft Scout defensive tackles coming into the college football season, but he's never. Thank you. There you go. I knew this was going to come in handy, right, AC? He was never the explosive guy, that we expected him to be. So, is he twitchy? Is he a 3 technique? Yes, he is. But look at the measurables on these two, right? Production wise, they're very similar in terms of what they've done. And for me, if you're gonna go ahead and get a Peter Woods, why take him in the first round? And I would just wait and get a Zane Durant in a third round potentially. Right? That's where I kind of target him. So again, true 3 technique. Zane Durant for me has a little bit more twitch, a little more athletic ability. So I think he's a guy that if you bring in here and just say, hey, Grady Jarrett, he's your understudy. Go ahead and teach him everything you know. I think taking a shot at a Zane Durant in the third round is a better option for me than taking Peter Woods in the first round at pick 25. At pick 25, I'd rather take a bigger defensive lineman like a Lee Hunter or even a Caden McDonald, where they're not as twitchy as Peter Woods is, so they might not have the potential to be pass rushers as a Peter Woods does, but they have more production on tape, and they can also utilize their power and their strength and their length to be able to make plays as a pass rusher too. So that's the way I would go. And and I would just wait for a guy like a Zane Durant in the third round potentially.
Yeah, I love that idea. Zane Durant in the third round. I mean, the guy's even got an interception. What more do you need from your?
He's a true 3 technique in terms of like quick, twitchy upfield attack. Motor runs hot. 24, he plays through the whistle, all that stuff. So I would love to get Zane Durant in the third round if I can get him.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll move on to some of our other questions. Do you think they sign another starting safety? I know you talked about Byard earlier, but AI Johnson brings up a good name that I've heard a lot. Nick Cross, maybe assuming Brisker leaves, and corner like Greg Newsome, and then look toward the draft to fill other notable spots. I know Nick Cross, I've heard a lot of people talk about him do it all safety for the Colts. Do you think that the signing of Kobe Bryant kind of puts that?
I would think so. I would think that if you bring in a Kobe Bryant and then bring on Nick Cross, obviously Byard is gone, which I don't want that, right? But that's a lot of money in two safeties, and I think that's where I think that's where the hesitation is right now in terms of signing Byard. I think they want to try and get Byard on their terms, and Byard saying, maybe thinks he's worth more, so he's out there shopping his services to other teams and see what he can kind of muster up in terms of the market. I think signing another safety in free agency, I think would be, especially Nick Cross, who's going to have a lot of suitors. I think that's going to be cost prohibitive, and you still have needs up front at defensive tackle and in defensive and potentially defensive end. So corner is another position that, a name I mentioned earlier was Tariq Woolen. He's a type of corner that Dennis Allen likes: long, athletic, guy can get physical at the line of scrimmage, guy can make plays, a ball hawking type of corner. You'll have mental lapse, right? You'll see mental lapse with Tariq Woolen as well. But that's where you give him to Al Harris, and hopefully Al Harris can fix that. So someone who's a Tariq Woolen like is Zoff Frazier, last year's 5th round pick, who we didn't see because of personal reasons. He never played. Now he's been in the program for a year, a whole off season. Presumably he's been working out, getting stronger. Hopefully, because that was his thing. Was he's got the length, he's got the size. Played at a small school. Probably was Texas, San Antonio. I believe that's the school he was at. Correct me if I'm wrong there, chat room. But he's a kid that got the length, has got the size, looks like a lot like a Tariq Woolen, but we never saw him play last year. And he was a 5th round pick. So, what is his, trajectory? What are their thoughts on a Zoff Frazier? Is he someone that they're counting on to at least come in and compete for time at corner? Because to me, there's a lot of question marks in the safety, right? Obviously, Jalen Johnson last year was a bad year. He was hurt all year. We assume and we pray that, with an offseason, he gets healthy and we get to see the Jalen Johnson that we've seen the previous years, which is, a somewhat shutdown, lockdown corner that Dennis Allen can rely on. Tyrique Stevenson, this is a make or break year for Tyrique Stevenson, right? I'm surprised that he's still on the roster, but that's me. The kid is talented. I mean, there's no denying that. When his head is on right and when he's focused, you can see the talent there. I think Tyrique Stevenson has starting potential, but it's just the up and down, the inconsistencies, some of the bonehead stuff that he does. If you can fix that or get that out of his game, I think you have two pretty good starting corners, assuming Jalen Johnson's back to health. Obviously, Kyler Gordon, we talked about it. We saw what he could do towards in that Rams game. How DA utilized him in that Rams game as a weapon, both in coverage and providing pressure. That's the Kyler Gordon you want. That's the Kyler Gordon that Ryan Poles extended. But the unfortunate thing with Kyler Gordon, he's never healthy. I can't. I think he's played one full season, if I'm not mistaken. Again, chat room, correct me if I'm wrong. But John Fox, you love him or hate him, but the one thing that he said that always sticks with me is the best ability is availability. And if you're not available for every game, or you're missing chunks of the season, every other year, or whatever it is, that's the thing, is you can't count on those guys. So, if all those guys are healthy, those are three pretty good corners. Now, add in Terrell Smith, who I was high on coming out of Minnesota. Unfortunately, he tore his ACL last year in the preseason. I think he was having a great season. I think him tearing his ACL, because remember he was battling Nahshon Wright for that starting corner job opposite Jalen Johnson. And I think him tearing his ACL gave Nahshon Wright the starting corner position by default, really. And then Nahshon exploded and had a great season. So, if Terrell Smith,
we didn't see him get a huge contract today with all his
another one, exactly. So if Terrell Smith doesn't tear his ACL in the preseason, do we have a Nahshon Wright? Does Nahshon Wright have the season he had last year? Right. So there's a lot of questions and no definitive answers. So to answer the original question, I still think corner could potentially be a big need. But if you bring in a Tariq Woolen, Greg Newsome is a guy that played at Northwestern, was a first round pick. It has been a kind of a little bit of a disappointment there with the Browns. Went to the Jaguars. Jaguars have no interest in signing him, it looks like. So I don't know how good of a player is. I haven't watched him, to be honest with you, a lot in the NFL. He was pretty good coming out of Northwestern.
Right.
So we want to bring him in the mix, but I don't. Greg Newsome to me is not a guy I'd sign. But all right, you're my starter opposite of Jalen Johnson, right? So I think that's the question mark there. Could they go potentially look for one in the draft? Sure, and bring one in and then compete. The kid I absolutely love in the draft is Chris Johnson out of San Diego State. Now he might be a second round pick. Is that too high for a corner? I just it depends on what they need and how the draft is flowing. But Chris Johnson from San Diego State is one that I absolutely love in the draft. So we'll see how it goes.
I feel like after his combine, Chris Johnson may have put himself up into the back of the first round.
We'll see.
I know.
Yeah, because his biggest thing was speed. You're right. His biggest thing was speed. And he ran was a 4.4. I think it was 4.40.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Not only that, when he ran the gauntlet, he looked so smooth and he caught everything. I'm a mock draft fiend, and I've consistently been grabbing late round corners, whether it be Devin Moore from Florida or Ephesians Prysock from Washington or the other kid out of Washington. They both have the size dimensions that they look for at the cornerback position. So maybe that's a day 3 pick that we go through. The last question I got from the chat is from D Stair, and he says, do you have any opinion on how Cunningham is faring in free agency with the Falcons? And I do have the moves that he has made.
I know I took Oz.
Mm-hmm.
Took Oz from us. Yeah, I mean, I think what they're doing is obviously it's a new regime. It's a new coaching staff. They're just kind of coming in and bringing in some guys that kind of fit their model in terms of how they want to play, their culture. Zacchaeus, I believe this is his second stint with Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken. And Austin Hooper, I think they got him back from the Patriots last year. So Dotson was another speed receiver that went in the first round that from Penn State that really hasn't kind of hit his stride. Mm-hmm. Had some success there with Philly in their Super Bowl year, but really hasn't kind of taken off there. And Cameron Thomas is an interesting guy. I think he was a one year contract. He's a guy that really kind of was a couple of training camps ago where he really kind of took off and showed some potential as a pass rusher, but really hasn't been, in my opinion, a more consistent guy. So I think that they're bringing in guys, filling in some depth, filling some spots that they think they have needs. Obviously, receiver is a spot that they feel like they need to. They cut Darnell Mooney, so that's a spot there where they want to bring in some talent there. But they signed Tua today, or I believe they're bringing in Tua Tagovailoa at Atlanta to compete with Michael Penix for that starting job. So, to me, that's right there. That's a little bit of a I don't know if it's worth a gamble. I know you get him for like $1 million. It's most of his contract being paid by Miami, which is fine. Taking a gamble there, and I just don't have faith in that guy as a starting quarterback. So we'll see. It's not much in terms of to kind of catch your eye and be like, oh my, he's doing a great job. Yeah, we'll see how the rest of the offseason goes, and then they go ahead and fulfill that with the draft. But new regime, new coaching staff. They just kind of want to bring in guys that fit their culture, establish that culture, and then we'll see how it goes from there. But I think for them, mostly, I think the draft is going to be very important for Ian Cunningham and Stefanski and the rest of the people there in Atlanta.
Yeah, I will say I love them bringing in Stefanski. I thought he was a really good coach in Cleveland. They let him go. He goes down to Atlanta in a division that's winnable. I mean, this was a team that went 8-9 last year. I think the whole division went 8-9, and the Panthers just ended up getting into the playoffs because they had tiebreaker scenarios.
Hey, don't fall asleep on the Saints. Don't fall asleep on the Saints.
Right. I love Shuck. Yeah,
I mean, Shuck, showed some signs last year. Obviously, they still have some talent there on offense. They signed Travis Etienne today. They brought in Dave Edwards, the left guard from Buffalo. They lost a couple players on defense, but I mean, the Saints could be something where Kellen Moore, I think, did a solid job as a rookie, first-year head coach. We'll see how that goes there, but I think Saints, and obviously last year's winner, the Panthers, with their big signing with Jalen Phillips today, and obviously the Bucs losing Mike Evans, that was a bit of a shocker
crazy,
there,
right?
Yeah, the guy that's ups and leaves after all these years goes to the 49ers. So NFC South is going to be an interesting division come next year. And yeah, it's up for grabs. And for me, for Atlanta, it all starts with the quarterback. Who's your quarterback? If it's Penix, is he healthy? And with Stefanski, I think he got a raw deal last year in Cleveland. I think obviously it was obvious to everybody that Shedeur Sanders was forced on him, not by the general manager, but by the ownership. And I think ownership wanted Shedeur, and I think they forced it on him. And it just looked nasty and sloppy from the beginning, and it just got even ugly towards the tail end. And I think that ended up costing his job. But yeah, I mean, he's a guy that's we know he's a solid play caller. He's a guy that's a two-time NFL Coach of the Year. He actually won a playoff game in Pittsburgh with Baker Mayfield as his quarterback, right? I think he's a guy that has shown that he can coach. So hopefully, wishing him and obviously Ian Cunningham the best of luck down there in Atlanta, and hopefully they can turn things around there.
Yeah, and Cliff says basically Atlanta needs a quarterback, and it's really not a good position because the LA Rams own their first-round pick this year for the James Pierce trade.
They still haven't explained to me why they used the 8th overall pick on Michael Penix if they went and they signed Kirk Cousins in the offseason. So I think right there was just it didn't make sense the night of the draft, and it hasn't made sense. Was it 3 years later? Still hasn't made sense. So they use a high resource, the 8th overall pick on a quarterback. And I know you have conviction on a player, but then why go sign Kirk Cousins, right? So
it's Mike Glennon all over again.
Well, yeah, a little bit different. Glennon wasn't getting paid as much as Kirk Cousins was getting paid. I don't think it was, but
no.
Yeah, it's just it was Kirk Cousins was the quarterback of the offseason, and they went hard after him, got him, and they just then ended up getting Michael Penix instead of using that 8th overall pick to fortify another part of the team with a high caliber draft pick. So now they have no Kirk Cousins. Michael Penix has his 3rd torn ACL in his career. It's unfortunate, right? Going back to his days in Indiana, the kid has just been injury prone. Mm-hmm. He's talented as hell. He's got a live arm. I really like them coming out of Washington, but it's just the kid's never been able to stay healthy, and they use the number 8 overall pick on him. It's been a mess since then, and I think it's just going to continue.
Yeah.
No, he's got a torn ACL, and answering the question from the chat, Penix has got a torn ACL. There is no timetable in terms of when he's going to be available.
Yeah. Yeah, in and out. I mean, but he did have a really pretty ball coming out of college. I mean, he made our guy Rome look really good.
Great arm. And that's, speaking of Rome, that's a guy that's going to have to step it up here with DJ gone. Rome, I know last year he played with that broken foot, and I'll give him props for toughing it out and showing grit and playing through it. But 3rd year, this is where now we expect Rome to take the next step. And obviously Luther, same thing with 2nd year. And then, I think Colson is going to be huge in his offense, just, stays healthy. I think Cole Kmet has, people talk about trading Cole Kmet. I would not trade Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet is a leader in that locker room. He's a voice on that offense. And I think he's very productive and he does a good job. And I think him and Colson balance each other out. I think they're a nice complement to each other. And I think you just kind of build around that group. And if you want to sprinkle, a veteran guy here, a draft pick here, keep it going. But the one thing I'm telling you guys, they are looking for a dynamic speed receiver, and they're looking for a dynamic running back in speed. And I'm not talking about a guy who's going to start over Swift or Malanga, for example, but a guy that's going to come in and provide a speed element from the backfield, a big play. John talks about those chunk plays, and you want some of those more chunk runs out of the backfield. So those are 2 position groups that they're going to add on offense eventually. Most likely it'll come via the draft, but if there's a veteran that kind of slips there, it gets traded or it becomes available, the Bears could potentially pounce there as well.
Yeah, Ben Johnson definitely loves those explosives. He talked about it when they asked him about the tush push. He's like, I like explosive plays, and that play is not explosive.
The player in this draft that I believe Ben Johnson would absolutely love to have is Jeremiah Love. I think he would love
everybody. I love that guy.
Yeah, I think because that's his Jahmyr Gibbs. That's Jahmyr Gibbs. That's his Jahmyr Gibbs. That's a guy that gives him that big play potential. Anytime touches the ball, it's a home run. Whether it's a pass or it's a handoff or it's a screen. I think Ben Johnson secretly would love to get his hands on someone like Jeremiah Love.
Well, I thought in a lot of my mock drafts, I had either the Saints taking him or the Chiefs.
He's not getting out of top 5, my friend. He's not getting. It's either going to be 3 to Arizona. Well, Arizona signed Algier today, and they have James Conner, so maybe that's going to. But it's either going to be 4 to Tennessee or 5 to the Giants. He's not getting out of top 5.
You think Giants will take another high running back?
Yeah, it's John Harbaugh. It's a different coaching staff, a different regime. Harbaugh wants to build around the running game, and I mean, I know they have Cam Scatterbo, but he's kind of like their David Montgomery, if you will, a less talented David Montgomery, I should say. But so Love will give him that speed, that big play guy, and then Scatterbo will be that pound in between the tackles kind of running back.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan. But a lot of those teams that I had them taking them, they signed running backs.
Why do you think the Chiefs signed Kenneth Walker? Because they knew everyone says, "Oh, the Chiefs are getting Love." They knew they had no shot at getting Jeremiah Love. So that's why they went and signed Walker, which I still wouldn't have done. But that's me. I don't sign running backs to big contracts.
Well, and he was kind of even the Seahawks used him in a 2-down, like they didn't trust him in the blocking game.
Well, it was part of a backfield committee with Zach Charbonnet, and then Charbonnet tore his ACL, and then it became all on Walker. And he had a great Super Bowl in terms of yardage, 161 yards rushing, but no touchdowns. So, and then he ended up getting, was it $12 million a year? I think it was 12-15 million a year from the Chiefs. So, I know he's going to be coached well with Eric Bieniemy there in KC. Right. So, no resting on your laurels there, Kenneth Walker. You're going to be coming and get ready to work because, EB is not going to let you just rest on your laurels.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to miss that guy here. Like, comment, and subscribe to the Barroom Network and to Shimon Draft Scout on YouTube. Hit the notification bell to tell you when we go live. And follow the Barroom on X, on Facebook. When all these things come out, the free agent frenzy started today, and it's just going to continue for the week on. And you turn on those notifications, and we're going to keep you informed right here on the Barroom. Until next week, Danny, we'll just leave everybody with a bear down.